Emmanuel Navon. Emmanuel, let's assume for a second that the information about the battlefield coming out of Ukraine is more accurate than that coming from Vladimir Putin. we've seen in the past. But that raises the question: if Russia really starts to suffer serious reverses in Ukraine, what is the likely outcome here? Is Russia going to resort to even more drastic action, or is there a possibility of some kind of settlement?
Yeah, well, first of all, regarding the report, obviously, according to Putin, the Ukrainians have been bombing their own civilians, right? So Russia is no longer a superpower, but they're still a superpower in propaganda. We remember how Putin said he was going to liberate Ukraine from Nazism, and his foreign minister, Lavrov, claimed that Russia was protecting itself from Ukrainian aggression. In any case, the big question here now is if and when the NATO-backed counteroffensive of the Ukrainian armed forces is successful or partially successful, and Russia has no other choice but to retreat from at least some of the territories it occupies in Ukraine, will Putin, the big question is, will Putin react with extreme measures such as, for example, tactical nuclear weapons, or will he be induced to reach an agreement with the West? And that is the big question. In any case, I don't see any possibility for him to negotiate with the West and with Ukraine without heavy losses on Russia. And then the question will be, which kind of deal? We've heard about the proposal that has been floated by Henry Kissinger, the former U.S. Secretary of State, who was basically proposing some territorial losses for Ukraine, and Ukraine would get accepted and become a member of the EU and NATO. I don't believe that Russia and the Ukrainians will accept such a model. But at the end of the day, the negotiation will have to include whether or not Ukraine stays out of NATO or not, and whether Russia will basically give up on most of its territorial claims on Ukraine.
I'm just going to say, it's almost impossible for me to imagine, for example, that Russia is going to give up on Crimea, to the territory that it held, I believe, since 2014, before this current operation. And yet we've heard, at least from the Ukrainian side and President Zelensky, that any deal that doesn't involve or address the Crimea situation is not going to be acceptable on his end.
So that's the question, whether NATO, whether the United States and Europe will be able to use the leverage of Zelensky and tell him, look, we've been supporting you in this war. If you're going to have maximalist claims over Russia, it's not going to work. The fact that basically Crimea was already lost to Russia in 2014 without any real reaction from the West, later, like almost 10 years later, to say, well, we'll take also the Crimea, that might actually be a red line for Russia. And of course, this is not to justify Russian aggression and illegal annexation of Crimea. But let's be realistic, and I think that the West definitely can afford, after all we did for Ukraine, to demand from Zelensky to be realistic. And if we're going to reach a deal with Putin, then things have to be realistic, and I think that the negotiation will really boil down to Ukraine's demands and to what the West is willing basically to impose on Zelensky after everything NATO did for Ukraine.
All right, Dr. Emmanuel Navon, we'll just have to see how this plays out. And like so much, it seems like it's going to be determined, first of all, on the battlefield. Thank you for that.